And hello, welcome back to Let's Talk More on Monday. My name is Arianna Cruz, and I am the owner of More Magazine, where we are working to make opportunities reachable for everyone through intentional storytelling and sharing space and sharing content that is curated to educate, inspire, and call people to action in different ways. Since the beginning, Isabella Lowery has been one of our writers, a friend of the magazine, and honestly like a really great sounding board for us as we've curated content and been a guiding hand to opening different doors and calling attention to different conversations that we might not have had. So I'm pleased to kick off this kind of where have we been, where are we going next series with Isabella from issue 1. Hi, Isabella.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. It's good to
So
be back.
yes, so pumped to have you. I love how much we have gotten to grow together. Fun backstory for all the listeners: Isabella and I grew up from like diapers to now, which I love, and it's been so cool because I feel like as we've grown up and lived in different places, but continue to see each other and make the trip to see each other, we've gone down different career paths than maybe what either of us would have ever imagined, and we've found ways to work together. And so today we're going to be jumping into your first article with us, first of 3, from issue 1, that was realizing and understanding my white privilege. Do you mind sharing a little bit? Actually, hold on. Let me rewind. Would you please introduce yourself, because the people need to know that you are graduating this year and you've already gotten at least 3 published articles, and you are boots on the ground. You are making shit happen in so many different ways for your community and those around you. I have no doubt on campus. And yeah, I would just, do you mind? Can you just take the floor and tell the people
Yeah,
what they know about you?
yeah. So I'm Isabella. I'm a senior at George Mason, so I'll be graduating this year. And my major was communications, and I've switched over to political management. So that's where I'm really focusing on right now. I work in the entertainment industry at a performing arts venue, and that's kind of my job by night. And then during the day, I do different political organization type things. I remember when I first wrote my first More article, I was just like freshly on a local political club as just like a member of it. And then I started interning for them and making some like social media content type things. And then through that, I was able to meet some amazing people. I was on a Senate campaign as an intern. And now I am communications director on one for the House of Delegates. So that is what I am doing with my time. Very, very busy, but very, very important and fun stuff. And yeah.
That's amazing. I remember when you were talking about your first internship and we were going through all like the interview prep and like whatever else, and talking about like all the different ways policy and communications and just the whole realm of things that all go into building a campaign and building that sense of community. Because I mean, when I think of policy and campaigning, like I think of community because people connect to who they connect to, and you have such an integral part of building that connection, which I think is so cool. And when we were working on this first article, we talked a lot about kind of meeting people where they are and sharing your journey and your understanding from like a personal place, because it is what happened to you and like how you experienced it and how you grew during that time. Do you mind sharing a little bit about maybe like a synopsis of that article? And we'll link it below in the show notes, but I'd love for the people to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that was just my journey with, like you said, again, understanding my white privilege and kind of taking a step back and focusing instead of, I think I have the type of mind where I hear a problem and I'm like, okay, let me think, how do I solve it? What can we do? What do we do about this? And that wasn't really what that called for. I think there was a lot of self-reflection that I needed to do, that everybody needs to do. I think it's great for everyone to occasionally have a check-in with themselves and think, okay, what do I need to work on? What do I need to think about? Um, and a lot of it was just me talking with people around me and kind of just getting exposed to things that you don't talk about as much because you're not comfortable with it. But that's kind of how you learn things and grow and make progress, which is something, a big theme in that article that we have to have these uncomfortable conversations, because then how else are you supposed to grow? Um, and that's something that I think even after I wrote it, I really carried that with me. And there have been a lot of questions and rooms I've been uncomfortable in, and people that I've talked with that I didn't exactly know how to approach it or what to say or how to respond. Um, but it is definitely worth it. And I've learned like so much in just like 4 years than compared to like anything before.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I read your article because I think a piece of it you were reflecting on what you learned in school and the icons of history that you learned about. And it made me, I don't know why my brain went here, but it made me think a lot about my favorite Disney princess growing up. And I mean, until the last few years, we really haven't had a ton of variety, if you will, in the princesses. And I mean, you and I, we grew up in California, so we went to Disneyland a lot. And so I remember like for so many Halloweens in a row, I was dressing up as a Disney princess. And my two favorites were always Mulan and Jasmine. And I remember thinking back and I was like, well, I don't like, why are they my favorites? Like, I can't really think of it. And I was like, well, Mulan is Asian and I am Islander, so it feels a little close. And then Jasmine, she was darker skinned. And for me, like that, I felt like that made more sense for me. And
Mhm.
it's just interesting because I feel like those were the stories that I thought of the most. And I mean, aside from like Jasmine wanted to marry for love and not marry for like royal whatever with whatever was going on and all those different things. I feel like I was always drawn to them because I felt like I could most relate to them, even though it was still like an entirely different ethnicity. It was like the closest grasp I had to feeling represented in that way. And I remember you talking about how when you were in your world history class or whatever it was, that there were so many people in history that were being talked about and you were being educated on that you could relate to. And that wasn't the same experience for a lot of people. And I think that that kind of reflection, I mean, it blows my mind every time you and I talk because you're just wise beyond your years. But like that kind of reflection, I feel like is sometimes scary for people because then it's you just immediately feel guilty. And I would love to kind of talk about like, yes, I understand the guilt or like the whatever that feeling is because you have to work through a lot of these feelings. But what was it like for you to reflect on that at such a young age, it being so fresh because you wrote this right after high school? And so then you went to a school where you're around all these new people from all these different places. And I think that that's college for a lot of people, anyways, if you go to a bigger university. But having just had that very fresh realization and then jumping into a space where you're with so many people with so many different experiences, what was that like having to like look at that hard mirror where you didn't necessarily like do anything that you should feel guilty of in that way, but realizing again just your privilege in that space?
Yeah. Um, there was a course I took in my sophomore year called Intercultural Communications, and it was all about communications between different kinds of people in different places. Mason has kind of a reputation as a commuter school, which it is, but there's 40,000 students and they are from all over the world. We have a huge population of exchange students. And we have a lot of like programs where you can go to Korea for however many months, and then they'll send over some people from there. Um, and it's really great and awesome. And also we have like a lot of food on campus that everybody like brings together, and there's like little festivals, and that's awesome. But I think the biggest thing with that was that we talked about in that class that it's uncomfortable. And I
Mhm.
didn't really think about what that word meant because I was just like, oh yeah, yeah, it's not really something I relate to or whatever. But you don't really think about how weird it is to not know something, to just have this complete it's not a human instinct, I think, for us to want to say, oh, I don't know,
Mhm.
to anything ever. And
Mhm.
I think that was definitely a big thing for me, where it's like, as someone who like I always want to get myself more educated, I always want to learn more and talk more with people. Like that was something that was really hard for me because it's hard to answer something with, oh, like I'm not sure, can you tell me, instead of, well, let me defend myself here and say this thing that I know, And just, I'm not like those people, but also like I totally get, there's nothing that you're getting from that. And there's nothing that anybody else is either. And I'm not learning and they're not, hearing me. And
Mhm.
why would they? Why would they listen to me? Because I'm
Right.
sitting here centering myself in something that has nothing to do with me.
Mhm.
So that was a big thing where it was just having to admit that you don't know certain things and being comfortable with announcing that you don't know it.
Mhm.
And now it's like it's hard in like the political field now because it's like a pet peeve of mine when people just talk on things that they have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm just like, I wish you would just say, I'm not really sure. Let me get back to you on that. Let me ask some. Let's open the floor to you guys. What do you guys think?
Mhm.
Because that's how we learn as, again, as humans. That's the whole point of it, especially at like an academic institution. It's like that's there's like we have some of the smartest people there
Mhm.
I've ever spoken to, like in my life, and they're all so intelligent, but they are all so focused inwards sometimes on themselves and their own experience. Um, and I'm not really saying it's not like their fault, but it's just something that I think you need to have that click moment where how are you going to talk about these kinds of issues if you're just centering yourself and your own experiences in all of it when the whole point is listening to others and hearing
Mhm.
their experience. And on the flip side of that, then it was hard for me to like kind of get the balance of it's not anyone's responsibility to tell me, because then that was the other thing. Then it's like that's the other side where then you have some people that sit and say, well, okay, it's you guys' job. And that's not right either. So it's a very hard balance to strike between just being a good ally, um, and being there, ready to learn, willing to learn, but also doing you have to learn yourself. You have to take that time to educate yourself. It's not just sitting and waiting for the information to enter your brain. It's decentering, like you, even with our Disney princess example, like that's something that I never even thought about it until I was writing the article because I haven't had to look for representation. The closest thing that I can think of is and obviously it's a different thing, but I know like with sexuality and things like that, like
Mhm.
when I started going through puberty and I found out I like girls and it was like really hard to get that kind of rep on TV, but I didn't even understand that that was something that I wanted because it just wasn't there.
Right.
It's something that you don't think about until you look back on it and you're like, "Oh, that's why I liked this character so much," or "That's why I was so attracted to like this specific book."
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't have that with Disney princesses because most of them looked like me. And
Mhm.
now it's like my younger sister is growing up in this time where there's a lot of work to be done, but there is things being done, which is really great and awesome. And like she has those kinds of models, and she's like exposed to things that I didn't even know were things at her age. That now she like has all of this knowledge, and I'm like, I'm having a conversation with you, and you're 10 years old, and it's stuff that like I learned at like 16.
Yeah.
Um, but that's like proof right there that it's the talking about it and
Mhm.
the seeing that represented that helps people learn.
100%, and I also think too, I mean, I won't this podcast will not be only about Disney princesses, but even even just showing, like, different kinds of love. I loved how, like, Moana and Frozen, like, it was not about romantic love. It was
Right.
about different kinds of love, and I think that is something I just got chills because I feel like we are, like, taught from such a young age that you are looking for, like, the love of your life, and, like, that is what you need to feel complete, and, like, all these different things. But to know, like, the love of, like, your friends and the people around you, your family, your chosen family, whatever that looks like,
Mhm.
and then to understand, like, different pieces, like, I think Moana talks a lot about, like, your purpose in
Mhm.
in your life and whatever that looks like, and I think especially as a lot of us get older and there's so many things happening in our world, and there's so much that, like, our hearts, like, we want to do and we want to be a part of, and we want to help move different things forward. It can feel so overwhelming to be like, I don't know what my part is in the world. And just to have like these different films come out in a way that is pouring into like mostly the youth because they're the
Mhm.
ones who are really like seeing it and watching it and that they're really made for. I am so excited to continue seeing the conversations that like you have with your younger sister and with other kids who you'll someday be in charge of as they're your interns and in that different way. Um I had to say that. But going back to some of what you said about like that reflection and that realization, I think there is so much power behind saying I don't know something. And as someone who mentors a lot, I know for me, being in that space of growth and learning, like I can't serve somebody well unless they tell me what they need. And
Right.
sometimes that is saying I don't know how to do something and then helping move that part forward even. And like you said, you can't learn and like a teacher can't teach unless they know what they need to be teaching on. And granted, like that is a very simple way of saying it because then you can get into like, well, there's curriculum and blah blah blah. But I think back to like us having to do all of those like pre-test or whatever in school. And it felt so silly, but it's like it's figuring out what we don't know because ego gets the best of us or pride or
Mhm.
lack of humility or whatever it is. And we don't want to admit that like we don't know how to do something.
Right.
And I think it's I mean, some of it's, I think, very cultural and being in a space where, like, everyone can look things up and you'll get canceled if you don't know something or whatever it is, because it can be so scary to say, "I don't know how to do something," or maybe you're worried that, like, if you're in a workplace, that if you don't know how to do something, then someone's better than you.
Hmm. I think there's also layers of like intersectionality, identity kind of things where it's like I know for me, like being a woman in politics, like
Mhm.
it's so hard to get those opportunities to even be in the room. So then
Right.
when you have to get there and then think, oh, like I need to say that I'm not totally educated in this area, like that's hard.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it has really paid off. And in that process, I mean, I've, like I keep saying, like I've actually learned from it. And there's so many times that I like think back to that. I'm like, oh my God, I literally learned nothing because I was just regurgitating what people around me said that I'm like, okay, that's the right answer. But I
Mhm.
didn't like take a step back and be like, okay, why is that the right answer?
Mhm.
There's something that we did in a work training. It was like a diversity work training. And it was for those who don't talk as much, think about why it would be productive for you to say something. And then it was like, and for those of you that do talk a lot, think about how it would help if you didn't talk. Think about what it would contribute if you sat back. And that, like, I was like, oh, like, I just got chills. Like, it's not that big of a deal, but it was like something that I really was like, oh, I guess I've like never thought about that before. And again, in that conversation, like, there were so many people that usually didn't speak up that were speaking. And I'm usually the blah, 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 blah person. And I like did not have any business talking. There was literally nothing that I could contribute. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that like my coworker was experiencing this or that we had this thing going on at our school or this on the campus. Um, so that's all really important. I think also what you said about the internet is like such a big thing. And I know that everyone's so sick of hearing, the internet, but it's like, but like that's what it is because it's like something that you can say that you think is like 100% correct. 2 seconds later, it'll get debunked. And then someone will sound smarter by saying, no, actually, this thing came out. And then 20 seconds after that, that thing's wrong. And it's like, it's pointless. But that's why it's like you shouldn't say anything with 100% certainty because how do you know? Because how do they know either? And you
Yeah.
can go over all of the like if you're writing, obviously, if you're doing an academic paper
Mhm.
and use don't use I don't know tabloids as your news sources, but also like it's hard because I think we're shifting to an era where like that is like Twitter like is or X I never call it
Uh,
with but like that is like where like I get a lot of my news
mhm.
and I've had to like for certain classes like they were like okay we're gonna like challenge you guys to not use social media as your news, which I was like, okay, easy. And it's really not. Like people are like, I don't have cable. And we're like, I don't like we don't like like we don't use anything. Like you just
Right.
have your phone. So that's
Or
like
there's
where
a lot of
everything.
paywalls. There's a lot of
Right.
paywalls then to different publications, and
I
I
was gonna
think
say like even like New York Times and stuff, which like school like some schools pay for,
right,
and ours like don't pay for like I'm lucky enough to have our school pay for that, but
mhm,
they don't pay for everything. And
right,
even with that, like you get a limited amount of articles. So it's like it's hard to go anywhere, but this word of mouth on, socials where at least it's accessible information versus
mhm,
everything else that you know is right, but it's so much harder to get to.
yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes I've seen online in the last few years is normalize changing your opinion as you learn more about different topics. Because I feel like people can be so quick to clap back of like, oh, well, last year you said you weren't down with X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, I've grown in the
Right.
last 65 days. So I think as my knowledge grows, I should be able to grow as a person and thus my opinions.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of the I have to be the right person in the room comes from that it's almost like that scarcity mindset that like there's only so many seats at the table
Hmm.
and you if you don't take it then like you're out.
Right.
And I think there's some truth to that in different settings, as we know, being like women pursuing our careers.
Hmm.
But there's also this beautiful thing of being able to add seats and just my favorite quote is like there's enough room in the garden for everyone to bloom or for
Hmm.
all the flowers. I'm like, we are all the flowers. And just because somebody else is right and you're also right doesn't mean one of you has to be more right in that way. Like you can both be contributing towards the conversation in a meaningful way.
Hmm.
And maybe by even saying, I don't know, that's contributing more meaningfully because there's other people in the room who also don't know.
Right.
So I love how you hone in on that because you don't know what you don't know. And if you are a white woman, then you will not know the experiences of somebody else until you learn about it. In
Right.
the same way, there are a million trillion experiences that I can't even fathom to begin to understand until I open that door up.
Hmm. And even though I've heard people, tell me their experiences or something, I think that's the other thing, that doesn't mean that I know what
Right.
that feels like.
Mhm.
Because that's the whole other thing where then you get trapped in this like, well, I read this thing, or well, I have this friend
Mhm.
that told me this. And it's like it doesn't compare to a life, somebody else's life. Just like, again, like you just said, like I have my own lived experiences, other people have theirs.
Mhm.
But there's nothing wrong with saying that you haven't been through something or experienced something that someone else has.
Right. I think we can all be empathetic and
Mhm.
lean into the connection of hearing someone else's story without trying to make it our own. Because I also
Right.
feel like sometimes that's where it gets really tricky. Is
Yeah.
we're like, oh, I totally understand. And it's like, you don't understand, but I appreciate your empathy.
Right. It's hard. It's a very, and that's, I think, what I kind of started touching on in that article. And then as I've continued in my career, I'm like, oh my God, it is like this crazy balancing act of like this, but not this much, and a little
Mhm.
bit of this, but then you don't want to come across like this way. Um, and it's hard, but it is
Mhm.
really worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%. I think being in politics and communications, like that's there's a lot of fine lines there you have to walk. But I
Mhm.
definitely think at the end of the day, like person to person, being able to empathize and connect in that way just by hearing people opens the door to so many conversations. And I think that, I mean, as we've seen post 2020, people want to connect
Right.
and people want to understand each other, I think. It's just a matter of are you willing to say that you need help understanding?
Right.
So, but this has been amazing. I enjoy every single one of our conversations that I get to have with you. And luckily, Chloe let me hijack the podcast for the next several weeks. And so, following this conversation, we're going to be heading over to our Patreon where we will be digging deeper together into a little bit more of this conversation. But until then, Isabella, how can the good people of More keep up with you? What are the socials? Where can they find you? And how can they support you?
Yeah. I mean, my Instagram is izzy.lowery. Shout out to that. But the biggest support to me would just be registering to vote. Please, that is very important to me, and that is what all of my work contributes towards. So just make sure that you are voting not only in our big national ones, but your local elections and state board, things like that. And be ready for this November.
Yes, yes. Register to vote wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.